Okay, good morning. Welcome to the Hill. It's Mars Hill, that is, here in Naptown, Indianapolis. Okay, so let me bring us all in here on Facebook. And that's okay, there you are. Let me see. Public change. Okay. Let's see if I got this good and set up good. Okay. Maybe I can make that a little bit darker, kind of bright. No, that don't look right. I like that look. Okay. Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone. Brother Jack here on the hill, Naptown. Getting ready to start our Saturday. I want to thank the Lord for waking up today, saving my soul, filling me with His Spirit, helping me pay my rent, get my rent paid, my utilities, food on the table. It all comes from you, Lord. I just praise you for it, and I want to thank you for it. We had a little problem getting started today, but that's all in the past. So, just to bring you up to date, here is the book. 4,000 questions and answers. Voila. As you see here, the idea is we're reading through these topics from this little book that ended up in my hands since 1910, 1929, and it goes through the Bible by topics from Genesis to Revelation, and it asks us questions about what we read, and we try to answer them the best we can. And if it needs be, I'll give a little commentary on it, what I'm thinking about those things that we read and stuff. And so, just to dial you in on what we've been going through, we just was with Joseph, and he just showed his family that he had been sold into slavery for God's will, and so they could preserve his family, the Israelites. And make a long story short, Joseph got knocked in the head, thrown in the pit, sold into slavery on a carriage of Midianites, going there, went to Potiphar's house, was doing okay there. Then his wife tried to assault him. Then when he went and lay down for her, she accused him of rape, so off to prison he went. There, while he was in prison, he became very good at taking care of affairs there. He met a couple of people there who belonged in the king's court, but for some reason they were there. And so the God started this by giving both the butler and the baker dreams. And Joseph told them that his God, our God, could interpret those dreams. And that's what he did. And one dream, when the butler, he interpreted it and said he was going to get out in 3 days. And it came to pass. But unfortunately for the baker, in 3 days he was going to get out, but they was going to hang him on the 3rd day, it's Pharaoh's birthday. So when the butler got out, like Joseph prophesied or interpreted the dream, 2 years later he's in Pharaoh's court, and Pharaoh has these particular dreams is disturbing to him. He couldn't figure out what it was. So the butler told him about someone who interpreted his dream and how he was going to get his job back with Pharaoh, and his name was Joseph. So Pharaoh sent to have him, brought him out of prison, cleaned him up, gave him a shave and everything like that, clean clothes and all, and brought him before Pharaoh's court. And Pharaoh told him the dreams, and Joseph interpreted the dreams. And because he was so impressed with his gift to interpret dreams, and Joseph was careful to give God all the praise for it, that he made him vice president over the land, where he took up his plan, which is to build a lot of food bins, so when famine came for 7 years, they'd have enough put back after 7 years of plenty, or if they could draw on that, it would help them through the famine. Well, it came to pass, and Joseph did as Pharaoh's dream asked him to do, and came to pass that down where Israel, his hometown, where his brothers and his dad lived, they ran out of food, and so they sent his boys up to Israel to get some food out of the food bin they got there. And this is where Joseph started toying with them a little bit, because he knew that they were his brothers and they had sold him into slavery. So he played a little cat and mouse game with them until he felt satisfied, and then he broke down and told him who he was, and Joseph told him to go get his dad, bring him up there. And when Pharaoh found out that Joseph's kin was there, he said, well, bring the whole fam. Bring them all. So they loaded up the how's the song go? And they loaded up their car, and they moved to Beverly Hills, that is, swimming pools, movie stars. So they end up there, and Joseph and Jacob, or Israel, depending on what you want to call him, they ended up both dying there. And during that time, Egypt, Pharaoh, and the Hebrew children all got along very well, and it was a very beautiful time. So as we pick up the story now, we find, as we're going to read, the Bible's going to say, and there arose another Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, meaning a new administration, new kid in town, okay? And during this transition, this topic's going to be coming up about how many kids the Hebrew children are having, and they wanted to put wanted to slow down. They didn't want to get more slaves. They weren't slaves then. They didn't want to get more Hebrews, people there, than there were Egyptians. They were out multiplying them. And at the same time, the Hebrew children started getting involved with the women of Egypt. And the women invited them over to their house, and next thing you know, they're losing their identity as Hebrews, to the point that they would want to get something from the Egyptian people, and if they didn't have the money, they would parse themselves out, so to speak, loan themselves out for labor and everything. Now, I don't know enough about it to know how this got out of hand, but eventually the parsing out, rent a slave, got to be turned into a slave, and they find themselves in a big bunch of doo-doo. So this is when God begins to raise up Moses to deliver his people out of Egypt. So that's a real short story of what we've just been through. So that what we're going to read today is the new facet of Israel's journey. God already knew about they were going to be enslaved all those years, but he also prophesied he would bring them out, and it was about ready to come to pass. But there's one verse here I wanted you to see. Oh, there's that. Let me go back here a second, a little bit. So we'll just pick up the story here. So Joseph is explaining to his family what happened. So it says in 19, and Joseph said to him, fear not, for I am in the place of God, or a place of authority. But as for you, you thought evil against me, referring to how they sold him into slavery on the caravan. He says, God meant it for good to bring it to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. We never know what the Lord's going to do in some matters, because he always sees the big picture. Our picture's sometimes a little more narrow-minded. So, and then it says, Joseph dwelled in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years. So that's the gist of that story. That chapter ends there. And it talks a little bit about his children there. And then Joseph gives a little prophecy to his kin. And he says, and Joseph said to his brethren, I die, and God will surely visit you. Talking about through Moses, but he didn't know who it was, and bring you out of this land to the land which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, Israel's original destination. So Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and shall carry up my bones from hence. In other words, he was going to be buried. So verse 26, Joseph died. He was 110. They embalmed him, there you go, and put him in a coffin in Egypt. So he was a mummy. I guess you could say he was a mummy. Nobody ever said, I never saw that before. So, and he goes, and he tells here in verses 1 through 10, all the souls in 5 that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And here it says, and Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. So wow, what a generation that was, y'all. Wow. So here I was talking about, so now we're going to set the stage to get this, how this slavery started. So it says, and the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly and multiplied, and waxed exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. Well, this got on, they didn't have any Pharisees back then, religious leaders, but they're acting just like it, the ones in Jesus' time. Here's that verse, it's the key verse. There arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. This new Pharaoh was a new king in town, as the Eagles song goes, and he didn't know anything about the old days, the good old religion, all that stuff. So he says to his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Okay, I don't know who said that. I don't know if Pharaoh said it or not. So he says, come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it comes to pass that there's a war breaks out, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us. So get them up out of the land. Well, this tells me, lets me want to talk about Islam a minute. Okay. A basic understanding, if you want to understand Islam, okay, there's 3 facets to their religion. They have a religious side, which is you and I see all the time here in America. Here, Christy and I live in an international community, and they're the most beautiful people, get-along people we know of. There's nothing about their religion or not being a religion about them. They're just regular people, except they like to wear their religion in their clothes. You know, they have a big clothes thing going on here. And they're very beautiful people, and they come from many parts of the world. And the other part of Islam is the political part of Islam. We see this happening in Washington, and they are trying to infiltrate, I call it infiltrating, then electing people to use our Constitution and our democratic process to replace the Judeo-Christian mentality with an Islamic mentality in places of authority, thereby working out their Great Commission, which is to bring everybody subject to Allah. That's the political part of Islam. And then you have the military part of Islam. So there's a religious part, a political part, and a military part. Now, why I call it three-headed is this, that because we're here in America, they don't get violent like they do across the way in the other lands. In some places, you can't even mention you're a Christian, or they'll just light you up. They'll kill you. And so in other parts of the world, we don't have that liberty and freedom of religion and speech like we do here in America. So since Islam, they won't our Constitution won't put up with that kind of going on. So the religious part is always seen basically in the political part of the Islam. But my point being here, back on this point here I'm talking about, where they said, verse 10, let's deal wisely with them lest they multiply and it comes to pass. So Muslims are filling up. They're having a lot of babies. It's not that the babies, but they're bringing them up to be anti-Christian. Okay? In other words, not necessarily anti-Christian, but their religion, if they can have it their way, they want to make you follow Allah. They want to make you do it, and then they want to, and they have a class thing. The military part of them, like in the other third worlds, they feel like they're better. And for example, back in Muhammad's day, if you wanted, I forget what they call them, a person that's not a Muslim, but if you wanted to walk in this town, you couldn't walk through a town. You couldn't ride a horse through the town because it would make them look higher than a Muslim walking. So one of their laws was they had to follow along a Muslim on a horse, where he sit on the horse, and they walked so everybody would understand that they were in their place, just like a slave, you know. So it says there. So if a war breaks out in verse 10. And there's a bunch of Muslims, or a bunch of, here in this case, a bunch of Jews, and our enemies fight against us, so get them up out of the land. So let's slow down the population there, the men. Okay, anyway. So if you get my point, this is what's starting to happen here. They're feeling a little fear, a wise thing to do. You don't want that many people living in the same town with you. They're peaceful now, but if it goes down, is it going to be, are you going to be Egyptian, or are you going to stick with being a Hebrew? And they know the Jews were going to stick with being Hebrew if a war would go down. So it was just a military precaution. All right, verse 11. Therefore they did set them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. So they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses, so a treasure city. So Joseph built feed bins for the Pharaoh to save people's lives. So Pharaoh wanted gods where they would put all the treasure. And you've seen the movie, The Ten Commandments. They put Moses to work to build those cities. So these taskmasters were designated from the devil to afflict them with their burdens, to keep them so occupied with construction work they wouldn't have time to rebel. Verse 12. But it backfired on them. It says, and the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. So they kept multiplying. 13. So Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. Man, that's like, here in America. Here in America, Abraham Lincoln read the Emancipation Proclamation there in the 1860s, that every man was free after the Civil War. But it wasn't until Martin Luther came on the scene, Martin Luther King, and he had a protest downtown the city, starts at the front of the bus and get all that rigmarole going, because even though the blacks were emancipated, they weren't. They were in theory on paper, but in reality, when they stepped out of the house, nothing had changed. It took almost 100 years until Martin Luther King brought a wave of liberty for the black people, the oppressed people. So, let me get back. So, verse 15, and the king of Egypt to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of the one was Shipra, the name of the other Puah. So he's telling, making a command, and he says, when you do office of a midwife, these women are helping the Hebrew children be born, and you see them upon the stools, if it's a son, kill him. But if it be a daughter, he shall live. What I'm seeing here is Satan is getting wind of, remember, from Genesis 1, a curse is pronounced on Satan that the seed of a woman is going to bruise his head, bash his head in. So he's trying to follow the lineage since then. So here we see him, which you'll see continuing as we go down through the Bible. He's starting to stop where he thinks that seed that's going to bruise his head of a woman, where that lineage is, and he figures it's coming here through the Hebrew people, and he's correct. So if he has his druthers, he's always going to kill the boys. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men, children alive. Let's try this. This takes me back to an abortion clinic where they're murdering children every day. Every day. Okay. So the women and the people that work in an abortion clinic and the doctors that are doing this, they're like working for Pharaoh. They're like working for Pharaoh. But some women who started off thought they were working, you take like, what's the name of that big fancy place? It's a Parent, you know, the one that gets all the money. I forget their name, but they're in the news all the time. And they get all this money to help women's services. But 99% of that money doesn't go to other women's services. It goes to keep the abortion slaughterhouse going. That's right. And so employees who would start out working in these, thinking that they were just trying to help women at these Planned Parenthood. And when they started working for Planned Parenthood, they thought they were going to be in a position where they could help the women as they come into the clinic and would place them in different stuff and help them get resources and stuff. But one day they says, wow, man, I know we're supposed to be helping these women, but all I see going on in my eyes, women are coming in, and the money that was supposed to go for this and that, it ends up paying for the abortion doctors, and Planned Parenthood's more than their business is all about killing the children, not so much other things. Now, you might have an occasional problem with the need for women in another area of Planned Parenthood, but their main function was to be a paper mill for women's abortion. That's a terrible thing. So these employees would say, if they had the spirit of Pharaoh here, they would say, I'm not working here. I'm not going to work in this murder mill. Huh. No way. And so they would quit and find them another job. But other women who had the spirit of Pharaoh on them, they would continue to work there, and it didn't bother them a bit. They could care less about the children, what they were doing with them there. So that's a little bit what's going on here. Okay. Verse 20. Therefore God dealt with the midwives, and the people multiplied, and they waxed very mighty. I don't know exactly what they mean by mighty. Nothing there. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. So God, these midwives who didn't want to perform the abortion chain, even though Pharaoh made it hard for them, it says God made them houses. That's a beautiful thing. 22, and Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. Okay. And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she took him for an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child there, and she laid it in the flags by the river's bank. Wow. So the sister stood afar off. Now I'm seeing the movie The Ten Commandments, if you hadn't seen it. They got Moses in that little floating baby carriage, and you see this gal watching it to find out what's going to happen. So in a way, this lady that's watching to see what's going to happen to Moses, she's a ministering spirit, a human ministering spirit. In the spirit world, you have holy angels that are ministering spirit. Then we have us. We're humans. We are ministering spirits too. We both work together. So the daughter of Pharaoh came down and washed herself at the river, take her shower or bath, and her maidens walked along by the riverside, and when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. She says, well, what's that over there? So when she opened it, she saw the child. Behold, the baby was crying. And she had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go, and the maid went and called the child's mother. Well, we know, in that beautiful thing, the baby was cast aside, but Moses' real mom got to be the caretaker of the child and nurse her up. So Pharaoh said to her, take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will pay you for it. And the woman took the child and nursed it. Now, isn't this a beautiful thing, how God works all things for good to those of us who love the Lord? So Moses' mom ended up taking care of him, and she got paid for it, but they didn't know it was Moses' mom. At least that's what I think. Verse 10, and the child grew, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She called his name Moses. She said, because I drew him out of the water. Hallelujah. Let's see what that note says. Drawn out. That's what Moses means. So it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out to his brethren and looked upon their burdens. And he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew with one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So what kind of charge would that be? Other word, Moses had this guy's back. He had his back. Moses had this guy's back, and he murdered this guy that assaulted the Hebrew. But I don't think he meant to kill him. But evidently he must have hit his head on the stone or something. And so when he died, he didn't want a scandal. So Moses hid him in the sand. He put the sin on the back burner. So he went out the second day. 2 men of the Hebrews were walking around, and he said to them that did wrong, he says, why did you, they said to him, why did you hit that guy? And he says, who made thee a prince and judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killest the Egyptian? Wow, this guy wasn't thankful at all, was he? And Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. So the cats got out of the bag. So when Pharaoh heard this thing, he ought to slay Moses, but fled from the face of Pharaoh, and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Well, that's all I have for you today. We'll pick this up tomorrow, where Moses saves the day at a well and finds himself a wife and begins his stroll through the 40 years in the desert. Okay? Well, y'all have a good day today. And this is a very exciting story. So I'll just piece it together as I feel the Holy Spirit's leading me. So God bless you all today, and we wish you above all things, Christy and I do, that you be prosperous and be in good health, even as your soul is prospering. We'll pick it up tomorrow, and looks like Exodus. Okay? All right. Bye-bye.